In the 1960s, a British classroom looked peaceful from the outside. Rows of desks, neat school uniforms, the flutter of chalk on a blackboard. But behind that calm picture were lessons, habits, and daily routines that would make any parent today freeze in disbelief. Children were taught things we would never imagine teaching now. They faced rules that feel harsh today, and they grew up in a culture that treated childhood in a very different way. Before we start, I want to ask you something. Do you think kids today have it easier or harder than kids in the past? Leave your answer in the comments. Your views actually guide the next documentaries I make. If you enjoy deep dives like this, remember to subscribe because we explore forgotten stories that shaped our world. Let us go back to a Britain that looked familiar on the surface but felt like another planet once you stepped inside a classroom. The world they grew up in the 1960s were years of change. Britain was moving from post-war recovery into a new modern age. But the schools still carried the older world inside them. Discipline was strict. Expectations were heavy. Children were taught to obey before they were taught to question. And the subjects they learned reflected a country still trying to define itself after empire and after war. Imagine walking into a classroom where the teacher paced with a cane in their hand, where silence was not requested but demanded, where every child had memorized poems and facts not because they understood them, but because that was how learning worked. This was normal, and it shaped a whole generation. Shocking lesson 1. The Cane AS classroom law. Parents today would be horrified to find out that physical punishment wasn't rare. It was part of the job. Teachers could cane children for talking back, for sloppy handwriting, for being late, even for mistakes in class. A child could return home with red marks on their hands or legs and nobody asked questions because it was seen as discipline. School discipline was considered a private matter. Think about that for a moment. Would modern parents ever accept a teacher hitting their children with a stick? How would people react today if a child came home bruised from school? Let me ask you this. Do you think strict discipline made students stronger or simply afraid? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your take. Shocking lesson 2. Memorization without explanation. In the 1960s, learning meant memorizing. Times tables, poetry, maps of the British Empire, long lists of kings and queens. Everything was written and repeated again and again until it stuck. But here's the shocking part. Many children memorized things they never actually understood. Teachers didn't break concepts down. They didn't explore the reasons why. Learning was about repeating back what the teacher said. Imagine being tested not on understanding, but on memory. A child who couldn't memorize was seen as lazy. A child who asked too many questions was seen as trouble. This shaped the way many adults later worked, thought, and raised their own children. Shocking lesson 3. Health and safety didn't exist like today. You might laugh at this, but the 1960s classroom had almost no safety standards. Kids used real saws in woodwork, real needles in sewing, real chemicals in science labs. No goggles, no gloves, bare hands. Children ran on hard concrete playgrounds with no soft landing. The teacher watched from a window. Injuries were common but accepted. Cuts, bruises, broken bones. That was childhood. This is the part of the documentary where I want you to think about your own childhood. Did you grow up in a time with fewer rules than today? Do you believe we have become too protective of kids now or not protective enough? Shocking lesson 4. Milk, prayers, and patriotism. Every morning began with the same routine. A prayer, a hymn, a reminder of British values. And after that, a tiny glass bottle of warm milk handed to every child. That milk is legendary now. Many children hated it. Many loved it. But what parents today might find strange is how deeply schools emphasized identity and loyalty to the nation. Children sang about empire. They learned maps that colored British territories in bright red. They memorized kings and queens, even if they never talked about modern politics or social change. In short, they were taught to love a country they were never taught to question. Shocking lesson 5. Girls and boys learned different worlds. If you walked into a 1960s classroom, you would see a clear divide. Boys were steered toward woodwork, mechanics, and science. Girls were pushed toward sewing, cooking, and home care. Not by choice, but by rule. Teachers told girls that their future was marriage, motherhood, and support. Boys were expected to be breadwinners. These lessons shaped futures long before the children understood what futures meant. Think about that. Imagine if a modern school forced children into gender roles. How would parents react today? Shocking lesson 6. Racism was normal in curriculum and culture. This is the part many people don't like to talk about, but we have to. The 1960s were years before multicultural Britain fully took shape. Schools often taught history through the lens of empire without showing the suffering of colonized people. Textbooks used words we would never accept today. Immigrant children were often punished for speaking their mother tongue. Some were told to anglicize their names. Racist jokes were common and rarely challenged. Many adults who lived through it admit they didn't realize how harmful it was until they grew older. MID story curiosity bait. We are only halfway through this documentary, and the most unbelievable part is still ahead. There were lessons so strange and so shocking that even people who grew up in that era have trouble explaining why they were allowed. Before we continue, I want to ask, would you want to live in the 1960s for a day just to see how different it really was? Tell me yes or no in the comments. And if this documentary is giving you value, hit the subscribe button. It helps the channel grow, and it tells me to make more long, deep dives like this one. Let's continue. Shocking Lesson 7. Nude swimming for boys. In some areas it sounds unreal today, but some boys were required to swim without trunks in certain school pools. The idea was that fabric caused bacteria. The real reason is still debated. But the practice happened in many British schools and was considered normal at the time. Try explaining that to a modern parent. It would spark national outrage today, but back then nobody questioned it. Shocking Lesson 8. Cold classrooms and strict uniforms. Children sat through winter lessons in freezing rooms because heating wasn't always reliable. Some schools kept windows open for fresh air, even in winter. Kids wrote with stiff fingers. They wore thin uniforms because that was the rule. Imagine sending your child to school today with no heating. People would call the school district within minutes. Shocking Lesson 9. No talk of mental health. Anxiety wasn't a word. Depression wasn't a discussion. A child who struggled was labeled weak or slow. There was no support system, no counseling, no special education programs. Many children were simply pushed aside. This is one of the biggest differences between the 1960s and today. We understand children far better now. We're reaching the final section now, and this is where the documentary becomes more personal. Because these lessons didn't just shape a generation of children. They shaped the parents and grandparents who raised many of us. And they shaped the country Britain became. Think about your family. Did someone you know grow up in this era? What stories did they tell you? The 1960s looked bright and modern on the surface, but the classrooms carried the shadows of an older world. Harsh discipline, rigid roles, strange routines, deep cultural blind spots. Yet from this system grew a generation that helped transform Britain into what it is today. So the question is simple. Were they stronger because of what they endured or in spite of it? What do you think? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I read every comment because they help me choose the next documentary topics. If you learned something new today, subscribe for more long documentary stories that dig into the past and explain the world we live in now. And share this video so others can see how much childhood has changed. Thank you for watching.